comfortable, your mother brings you food. Everything is precisely so. And when you get to a tournament, all that changes. Now, no one is going to know what kind of effect that has on you when you get to a tournament. Strangely enough, for me, it did something to me, because I got to this room and it was about the size of this room. All the seats were taken, and there were a few people standing on the side. And I was going to play this French hero. He had already proven himself on events. He had even, I think he had even won a major event for thousands of dollars and unimaginably big amount of money. And he was there. I was there all alone. He had his girlfriend there. He had this local TV station interviewing him. There were lots of fans. He was French. We were in France. Everyone was French. They were all for him. And it just did something for me, because I think I played better than I had ever played before offline. So it kind of had the reverse effect on me. I wasn't nervous. There was nothing, with my equipment. Maybe my equipment was bad. I have no idea, but I went on winning that game. It was like the opening game of the tournament. I won 2-0, and that was kind of my entree into the world of offline esports, where I could finally say, see, I'm not just onliner.
Thanks. So it's been interesting to hear sort of that beginning moment when you're going into tournaments, but maybe you can sort of talk a little bit more now about what happens when you're established tournament players and you're within that sort of little scene, you're coming to rise up to be those great players in the tournament. So the question would be, where are those differences between good and great players, and where's that manifest? And maybe just to give you some ideas where you might go with this, start talking about something about attitude, about discipline, maybe techniques, and how changes in these areas might have helped you and sort of put you ahead of the other good gamers and teams. Is there anyone that would like to start?
I mean, well, I can start.
Yeah.
For me, I found that once I had gotten to a stage where people had recognized that, at least in the arcades, there's this guy, we don't know what his name is, but he's pretty good, have you seen him, kind of thing. And I was that guy. And I think at that period, like when I started to notice a difference between me and other supposedly good players, I wanted to keep that lead as such. I wanted to kind of keep myself established, or I just kind of liked the way I was going. And I think what kept me above everyone else at a certain period was the kind of, not regime, but almost like the effort in practice that I put in. And that would be basically looking at scenarios in the game and committing things to paper, sort of putting down strategic, formats of what I can do in a certain situation to overcome the odds and things like that. And I think the research behind what I wanted to get from the game is what kept me above everyone else, because I'm pretty sure that at that time no one else was really that into sort of going really deep into finding how to win and stuff like that. And I think that it's the research that kept me above everyone else. Although other players were good and possibly even had a lot more potential than me, I think that in some cases it's just that the work that I put in kept me above the rest.
Should I go next?
Sure.
When I speak about the first 3 years of my career, where I won quite a lot of championships in 2004, 2005, among which 2 world championships, I think one thing that set me apart from a lot of other players was that I didn't have any fear. You can play, like let's say if you're preparing for a big tournament, there's lots of players who will try to hide the strategies which they are secretly preparing, up to the point where they can put it to its full use. If there's a small tournament before a big tournament, you'd be foolish to show your best tricks, because it's not worth it for the small one, keep it for the big one. But I think one thing that set me apart was I showed everything every time I played, but I know what I'm showing. So it became this psychological game, because when I have 3 strategies and I show all of them, and my opponent knows that, he has to keep into account he might use any of these 3 different strategies, and he has to make according preparations. But when I know that he knows what I know, then I try to develop a fourth strategy for the next time and catch him off guard like that. And it's really those times where you feel like you know what your opponent is going to do before he does, is that you go into the match with such a confidence and you feel like you can predict all of his moves. And it's really those moments that you can say that no matter what you showed before, you've got the one up on them.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, for me, when Counter-Strike was basically in its infancy, tournament-wise, back in 2001, 2002, and most of the top-level players, they were there based on talent alone. I mean, obviously they'd play the game a lot, but they were really talented in FPS games as well. And when I started coming up, I think one of the most profound things that I recognized was that I wasn't really that talented. So for me to be able to compete, I really had to work at it. I had to work on every aspect of my game to get there individually. And Counter-Strike is a team game. So what's really important with Counter-Strike is how you play together as a team. And after a year or two of going to tournaments, I realized what I was really good at was not the shooting people in the head thing that you do in Counter-Strike, but I was really good at making people work together. Because it's not only what you do in the game inside your computer that counts, it's how you work with the people to develop strategies, to analyze what went wrong, to make sure that you're better prepared. And in that way I saw Counter-Strike not as an e-sport, but as a general sport, because that's what you do in football, that's what you do in handball. The big difference was that in football or handball or basketball or whatever, you have a coach that does those things for you. In Counter-Strike, we have to do everything by ourselves. So there's really two types of teams, and there are the teams which don't have a defined leader, which just plays off their talent and try and develop some sort of strategy. And there's teams that have a set sort of leader or captain that develops those strategies, takes the decisions in game, and takes the pressure off the other players so they can just focus on shooting. And you see that today as well with the greatest team in the world being Fnatic. They also have that same model, and that's what I figured out early on, that if I was good at anything, it was leading teams and making people from different backgrounds work together towards a common goal, which was winning matches or breaking through or progressing from the group stage in this tournament, making it to the semifinals in this tournament, or getting to the finals of the next tournament again. And that's sort of how I found my way. And today I think you see that most of the Counter-Strike players, they've recognized the fact that you can't go at it on talent alone. So today everybody practices their heart out and plays a lot to become the next big thing. But back then it was sort of something that a few people realized that you really had to work on it to become a great player.
Thanks. So you just mentioned a little bit of the next question, and it's actually a question from you, Manuel, that we might talk about here. The other ways that you go about increasing your performance outside of the game. Perhaps it's traditional sports, perhaps it's some kind of philosophy that you believe in. Are there other ways that you are sort of enhancing your performance outside of the game that you might be able to talk about?
I can start if you want to. Well, I think people do it differently. You have to. The main thing about playing in tournaments with all the pressure is that you have to find a way that works for you as an individual. And after a couple of years, I realized that I was doing it all wrong, because I was going to these tournaments and I was worrying about what our sponsors would say if we lost, what the fans that were behind us would say if we lost, all those negative thoughts. But once I realized that I was there, I was in a privileged position to be able to travel the world and compete. And the reason why I got involved in the first place, because I love to compete as well. So I realized I just had to enjoy it. And once might sound simple to you, but under all those lights, it's kind of hard to think clearly that way. And when I realized it, it turned my role around. So I started just looking forward to competing and trying to instill that in teammates if they were nervous and stuff like that as well. So you do all this mental preparation outside of the game. And for me personally, I also had a routine every time we were at a tournament. I'd try and get up early, have a good breakfast, maybe preferably be able to work out or at least go for a walk and clear my head and sort of get in the mindset that you need. But I've heard that the players do everything from sleeping until the admins call to wake them up and drag them to their computers to go to McDonald's. So I think that's really individual.
I really recognize what Jonas is saying about times and phases where you feel like you're thinking about it in the wrong way. Like you could be worrying about the wrong things, and worrying by itself, well, even worrying about the good things would be bad. Worrying in itself is not very productive. Sometimes you just have to go back and try to see, you know, I'm having this chance to play these tournaments, and yeah, I always have to do it for the enjoyment. If not the enjoyment, then you might as well stop, because the enjoyment is where your heart's at. And as far as what can you do to get better discipline or whatever, I really think that for me, pro gaming, like winning tournaments, has been my life for several years, and it's still a very big part of my life. And for me, that means that my philosophy for competing is simple. Every single thing that I do every day when I'm preparing for a tournament, I ask myself, will this help me or will this not help me? And it can be small things like, should I drink water or bubbled water? You know, what's gonna help me perform? You know, should I sleep 8 hours or 9 hours? Shall I hang out with this person or that person? Shall I talk a lot today or shall I be rather quiet? And then it's just the whole visualization of your dreams, your goal, your wish to win that pretty much fuels the motivation behind every single little thing that I do on a day, that I think, you know, should I train more or take a rest? It just it becomes a philosophy.
I think also that it's really strange in the way that you worry like that, because you spend all these hours, you start playing the game, you love the game, and you realize that there's tournaments, and you spend all this time practicing to get on that level where you're going to be good enough to be able to go somewhere and compete. And once you get there, you start worrying about all these other aspects instead of just, I reached my goal, I'm here to play, and this is what I wanted to do for the last year, because it's really, to get to that level is really difficult. So you don't really recognize that it's a fulfillment of a goal to be able to just be there, and that should give confidence to any individual, but we really forget to think about that, I think.
Yeah, one thing that Jonas mentioned was the pressure of, you know, if I lose, what are the sponsors going to think? What are they going to say to us? How's that going to affect our team? But like, you know, fighting games hasn't been in the e-games world that long, so I don't have any experiences of feeling that particular pressure. But there is pressure in itself of just being a part of a big scene with everyone being really competitive and the competition being fierce, that kind of just instills a lot of fear before a big tournament. And I think no matter what the game is, if you know that you're in a position where how you're feeling can affect your performance on the day, I think you'll always feel that pressure. But I think one thing that you mentioned was the fact that it's about your feeling and what you want, your dreams, your desires. And I think it's all about the passion that drives you to get to these high levels of whatever it is you're doing. And that is basically what you should, that is basically why you enjoy it so much. It's the passion. It's because you're doing it because you love it. And that is why the best way to enjoy these events is just to have fun and not think about how serious it is and stuff like that. I mean, that's basically what I've done on a personal level. But if there have been times where I've been really, really nervous and even just trying to enjoy it hasn't been enough, where I haven't been able to just be myself and relax with people, I would then possibly look at certain match-up scenarios where I know that I could be vulnerable in a certain match-up if I don't plan accordingly for a certain situation. So I'll go through match scenarios in my head and actually think about what I'll do if the opponent tries a certain move, and think of a counter and then a counter for that counter, and etc., etc. So there are many ways to, and that will then calm me actually. So then I'll find that I can enjoy the event leading up to the main tournament finals, etc. But yeah, it's very, I always think that with every event, and sorry, I was going to say that with every event, this never changes, by the way. Even though I've been doing this for over 10 years, before each event, I always know the reality of the pressure of what's happening. Just because I've won world tournaments before, it doesn't make me think that this one's in the bag. I always know that I have to respect each and every other player there. They could have put in just as much work as I have, or even maybe more than I have. And you know that the threat is there that you might lose, but it's never the end of the world if you lose. I think the main thing is to be there to fulfill your passion, you know, living out your passion. The fact that you're actually being able to use your passion in something you like and be successful is almost like a victory in itself. So I think that players are putting too much priority sometimes in the risks of everything, and not just taking time out to realize exactly where they are and just what's good about what's going on.
Thanks. So, Jonas, you mentioned it again, and it comes sort of out of the structure of team sports, this idea of knowledge sharing and mentoring. I'm wondering, for you two, how's the sort of mentorship in a single-player sport? Do you lend a hand downwards or outwards to talented players that you see on the scene, or is it something that's just not done? We'll start with you again, Jonas.
All right. Well, I had a really, I have a way of doing that, not only to my teammates, but to the rest of the Norwegian scene predominantly. But they don't really recognize that. But I want to compare esports, if you bear with me for a second, to football games. If you're the young, talented player on any team, and you get up to a level where you get to play with the A-level players of, say for instance, Champions League winners Inter, and the first thing you do is you shoot your mouth off and you dribble some of the older, more established players. There's a sense of community there that's meant to keep the young guy in check, so you have a culture where everyone behaves a certain way. And it's the same thing with team-based esports as well, because the young players coming up, they're always shooting their mouth off, fresh, high on really wanting to display their skills to the rest of the world, really there to make a statement saying that I used to be a noob or an online hero, but now I'm the next big thing. I'm going to be on huge banners and I'm going to be fatality next month. That's really the mentality, but we don't have a set we don't have a way of assimilating them into the same culture like they do in football fields, on football teams. So that's what I usually did in the Norwegian scene. I was trying to, I wouldn't say put down the younger players, but it was more of putting them in their place. And if you ask me, it's for their own good, because they have to, young players, up-and-coming players have to recognize that anybody, if they apply themselves, have this much a talent, can, in my opinion, make it to a team that can attend an international tournament. That's not really difficult. The really difficult thing is being able to stay at that level. And that's hard. That requires years and years of motivated practice and preparation. And in Counter-Strike, a lot of players have really short careers because they can't handle the pressure that comes with that job. So if you want longevity, you have to recognize these traits. And that's, most of the young players, they don't. So I'm really hard on young players, always. I've always been hard on young players, but I try to make a point of showing that I care as well, talking to them, discussing with them, but really trying to put them down once they shoot their mouth off, because they have to come down a level, they have to take it down a notch in able to sustain and build a career. And that's what I want, because I want the sport to evolve. And for the sport to evolve, we need to have people that can build careers, that can be in there, that can pass knowledge on to younger players again at a later point. And with one-hit wonders, you don't get that.
I think Warcraft 3 is quite a gentlemanly sport. Perhaps a little bit more gentlemanly than Counter-Strike.
Definitely.
Which you can clearly recognize when you put a group of CS players and Warcraft players in one room, and the Warcraft players are all looking at their screen and thinking, and the CS players are like, yeah! I think what's really important in Warcraft 3, when you talk about inter-player relationships and new players and so on, I think the older players somehow expect that the young player respects the older player for the position he's in, or for the skill he has, or the experience he has. And at the same time, I think it is the job of the experienced player to not be jealous, not to jealously guard their secrets, which they may have uncovered already, but instead to share that information with the new player to kind of help them grow. And that's something that has really given me untold pleasure, just to see this young player who I can recognize has talent, who could go all the way if all the stars align, or if he just has the right mindset about it. And it really gives me pleasure to kind of try to guide them along with just with how to behave, to be a successful player, how to develop your skill, how to train, and how to play. And the added benefit, since Warcraft 3 is a one-on-one sport, in a way, no matter if you're in a team or how many friends you have or how many practice partners you have, it is in some way a bit lonely. You always have to do it by yourself. You cannot rely on your teammates. The advantage is teammates cannot bring you down, but in the end, only you are responsible for the performances which you deliver. And one thing that I really found is very important for a new player and an experienced player alike is to have good relations to other players. Because, like Jonas said, some players, they have a lot of raw talent, but simply because they cannot control their urges or behave, they find themselves with less and less practice partners, because who really wants to play with a guy that calls you an asshole every time you win? That I kind of can find better than that. And on the topic of mentors, I think all the experienced players, and sometimes even a young player, they can teach you something. We're all kind of each other's mentor. Whenever we lose our way, we can engage in discussions with another player that we know, that we play with, and learn a lot from them. So I think it's always important to try and learn from other players.
Yeah, ever since fighting games became slightly more popular, since the next-gen consoles allowed, certain fighting game franchises to go online, you get a lot of people which are called bedroom champions, which you never ever see in public, but they're apparently the best, players. And you have this influx of new usernames on forums, and then suddenly this guy is claiming to be the best so-and-so user on a game. And this is very interesting, and this is where a lot of generations collide. You have the expert older players saying, "Who are you? We've never heard of you." And then you have these other players saying, "Well, I have this and this amount of online with champion points," and stuff like that. But this is also where players actually come together and increase the scene, because then they join the tournament scene and come to an offline event and realize what the real world is about, and kind of get humbled with that experience. But basically, what's interesting is how with each fighting game, the scenes are completely different. Although everyone's playing a fighting game, for example, like the virtual fighter players are very peaceful, very calm. Between the older and the newer players, everyone is getting on really well. It's like, having a picnic in a bird's nest. Everyone's happy. But then you get like the Tekken players, and if you win, then you're an idiot, and you've got no skill, even though who's saying that person's got no skill is the one who lost to that guy. But you have all these different things, and Street Fighter is another thing, and so it's quite interesting that inside of one genre of game, you've got all these different groups that have completely different ways of approaching their own fighting game. And basically, when you get what's big now for me is Street Fighter 4, because that's what everyone's playing, and so I'm a big part of that scene. And you've got a lot of new players who, although have a lot of talent, don't know how to channel it. They don't know how to train. They don't know how to practice. And then you've got a lot of the expert players who are like, well, you should know. But they don't realize that when they started out, they were exactly the same. So you've got a lot of people who don't actually communicate in the right way. And I think what's interesting now is because of all these new players on forums, we actually have a channel to guide these new players in the way they need to go. We have a way to reach these players. So although they come on forums and write words that can't be displayed for whatever reasons, we do appreciate that now we can reach these people who would otherwise would never have been heard of and would just have remained infinite bedroom champions. I like the mum bringing dinner example. But, you know, and that's really nice, I think.
Great. So, like we said, we had a PhD course here, and we had some sports people coming in, and when we mentioned that you could actually experience really big kicks of adrenaline when playing games, I was like, oh, is that right? So maybe you'd also be able to talk about sort of the pleasures and challenges of tournament exhaustion. And I'm looking at you, Ryan, because you've just had a recent feat of the Guinness Book of World Records, where you played 4 hours in a row, and talking about playing at that top level for so long. And it's the same of long tournaments, weekend tournaments, of still playing at your top level after days and days of challenge.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but one thing in the fighting game scene that a lot of players will complain about older than you is that some fighting game tournaments are just too long. They go on and on. Sometimes they're 2 days straight, and I know that LAN parties are also quite long as well. So it's probably nothing compared to some styles of LAN party, but for us, we're not used to that. We're used to sort of minimal input, like short arcade bursts of play. We don't sit for hours and then have short breaks and then hours again and stuff like that. So it's quite new for us. Now, with the Guinness Book of Record challenge, it was 4 hours. Basically, I had to get as many wins as possible against an infinite number of challenges within a 4-hour time period. Now, on the way to the event, I initially was a bit worried, like, okay, because the current world record at that time was 108 wins, which is 27 wins an hour, which is like nearly a win every 2 minutes. So I was really nervous that how on earth am I going to be a person in quicker than 2 minutes consistently, you know, for over 4 hours without any exhaustion or anything. And so, you know, I arrive at the event and people start challenging, and basically it's just anyone, you know, that turns up at the shop. It was held at a game station, you know, store, and anyone just, you know, shopping or who happened to know of the event could come down and challenge me. And I took on 169 challenges, so that was the new record. And they were encouraging me to take breaks. You know, why don't you have a break, Ryan? And I was like, no, I'm fine. I just wanted to get it over with. And of course, that depletes your time even more if you start taking breaks. So I didn't want to do that at all. And the thing is with that, when you play, you know, to that level of immersion, like for such a long period of time, I think you're not aware of the world around you. You're just so inside of you're just dissolved in the screen of the game. And you know, after the match, people were telling me that I had been asked questions, and they were like, "Why did you just keep ignoring everyone, right?" I was like, "No, I didn't realize." So you know, it just goes to show you that, you know, although our senses are very abrupt and stuff, we can be dissolved so much in one thing that we just don't know what's happening. It's almost like you're sleeping. You know, your eyes are open and you're active, but you're just not there, you know. And I actually had a scientist who invited me to conduct some research on my body to find out what makes me better than other players on games. And it was very scary. I was told I would have wires attached to me and stuff like that. I was very nervous. I'd never even heard of something like that, you know. I was wondering if I would end up with 2 bolts in my neck or something. But anyway, basically, it was held at the Capcom office, so it was, you know, organized through Capcom, you know, for a Street Fighter promotion. And I went there, and there was a guy from, you know, all these PR people looking at me, you know, wondering what I'm going to look like at the end. And they hooked up some things to me, and they tested my reaction time, they tested my mind during the gameplay. I had to fill out a number of questionnaires, which basically just put you in everyday scenarios, day-to-day situations, you know. Like, you know, what kind of are you the kind of person who gets excited from an emotional movie easily, or, you know, all these different day-to-day scenarios, nothing special, nothing to do with games, in fact, just daily scenarios that they use the answers to tell how you think and the way your brain works. And they leave you alone, they let you play the game for 10 minutes, and then they come back in, and then they immediately give you a form, another questionnaire, which is like 10 questions that has things to do with the game, like, during the game, did you notice things around you? How did you feel when you played the game? Were you upset when it was over? I was like, yes, you know, and all these things. And they found that I actually had a deeper level of immersion than anyone they'd ever conducted the tests on. So I'm not sure what that really means, but they told me that. And but it just goes to show you that my experience and my victories through that experience probably have something to do with my connection with the virtual world. You know, there's something that I can. There's a way that I can disconnect myself from what's going on around me and put myself in that game world that kind of sets me apart separately from other good players who probably are good or really good or maybe more talented but can't actually put themselves in to it as deep of a level.
So Jonas or Grubby, the pleasures and challenges of tournament exhaustion, or a comment on Brian's experience?
Okay, I went to Las Vegas for a World Championship 2 years ago, and for the first time in my whole life, I actually collapsed. And I was unconscious. I blacked out, and they had to carry me to my hotel room. And this was something that started with just a tiny minuscule headache. Something I just wouldn't have thought that would be anything big. But I played a match, and I hadn't played many matches that day, but we had something like a long session the night before, so exhaustion was definitely up there. But as soon as the match was over, I had no choice. My body just naturally keeled over, and that was it, and I was out. So if people think that, you know, when you play these games that you just get up and walk away each time, it's not the case. You can get so tired that your body has no alternative but to just go into sleep mode. And that was my that was probably the worst thing that's happened, like, in terms of exhaustion from the tournament.
Well, in my transition from being really nervous before a big game to where I eventually came out, being able to fully enjoy it and just appreciate all the lights and appreciate the pressure. In between there was a time where I always fell ill. Every time we'd progress through a tournament and would get to a final or we'd get to a big game against a well-known team, I for some reason would get ill. And I'd have like flu-like symptoms, stuff like that, and it really happened like clockwork. I never got that checked out, but I'm pretty sure it has to do with the way my body handled the tension of being or getting to that point of near goal fulfillment, if you will. And that's the only tournament exhaustion that I've suffered. But in Counter-Strike, it's really different because it's a team-based game. You have to practice so much in order for all the 5 members of the team to be coordinated. So our sessions usually were 5 hours, 6 hours every day for 5 days a week, often for a month before a tournament. That's what practice is for Counter-Strike players. You really don't have that much. When you sit at home in your cocoon, you really don't have the adrenaline, but it's also very important to talk continuously because it's a game where you have to communicate all the time and able to produce results. So you sit at home, you talk to your computer for 5 hours, and then you go to a tournament. And when you get to a tournament, it's really different because you get the adrenaline of playing a match, and each player can feed off the other player's adrenaline. So if there's someone that's more excited on your team, you usually feed energy off of that person. Here's where tournament organizers can really mess things up for you, because in football or basketball or any real sport, I say real sport, you have a definite time where your match will start, and you know that your match starts at noon, and you play 2 halves of 45 minutes, or you play 4 quarters of 20 minutes, or whatever. But in Counter-Strike, one of the formats is best out of 3 maps, and a map can take 45 minutes, or it can take 30 minutes, or it might take 50 minutes, and you might have a computer crash in the middle of the map, and which will prolong that first map, and then there's a break in between, and that's not really regulated either, so it can be anything from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. So you get all these starts and stops and starts and stops. And at the end, you can't really turn on the adrenaline the way you can for the first game. And that's really exhausting for players.
Well, as a Warcraft 3 player in a cutthroat competition environment, it has been very important to put the hours in for practice. I could be practicing anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day for a month, and I wouldn't feel tired. Yeah, sure, I'll feel tired at the end of the day, but it wasn't an unnatural exhaustion. And I am using a lot of brain power, I think, to be playing the game and to prepare all sorts of different techniques and strategies. But then I get to a tournament, and let's say it's a 5-day tournament. Okay, the tournament is really long. You could be getting up at 8 a.m., have your breakfast, go to the tournament venue, 6-hour delay. You play the tournament, it goes on till 1 a.m. at night, and next morning you have to start again and wake up at 8. So I've had tournaments where I sleep about 6 hours every night, 5-6 hours, and I'm a guy who needs 8 hours a night. So that's normally after 1 or 2 nights of 6 hours a night, I'll be really tired. But at the end of the tournament and during the tournament, I kept thinking, why am I so awake? Why am I so awake? I'm not tired. And I paid the price for that after the tournament because I just get home and I just feel drained. Like, especially if I won the tournament and I went all the way and I played all these different people of great minds and I came out on top. I get home and I just can't really do anything for 3 days. I'll sleep 12 hours a day. I just feel empty. And then after that, I feel that was a kind of transition back to the real world. And I can start filling up my head again with other things like, anything.
Thanks. So it's pretty well known that marathon runners have the absolute worst feet in the world. That's where their sport hits them. How does technology hit on your bodies? Where do you feel it?
I mean, I get tired, obviously, from sitting in front of the computer a lot, but other than that, it didn't bother me. And when I started playing, I heard a lot of these news about people that were working. They had these chronic issues with your mice and everything, but I think we are, or at least our generation, we're used to computers, we're used to handling peripherals, we're used to watching the screen, so at least for me, it hasn't really affected me in any abnormal way, outside that obviously I'm tired or drained, as Grubby says, after prolonged competition or practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think because we're all pretty used to, we know the safety regulations, don't play too close to the screen, things like this. But I think that for me, I mean, I used to, before a tournament, practice something like 7 or 8 hours a day. And the thing is, the intensity of the matchups, because you're playing to a really intense level in such a short space of time, then repeating it so many times. You know, if you enter a tournament where there's over 1,000 players that have to be all whittled down to just one, and you happen to win something like that, you don't really feel it immediately. But I think afterwards, like the transition to real life, I think the adrenaline of the joy, the happiness that you actually attained that goal is what keeps you awake, maybe. It's what keeps you alive. It's what keeps you. It does keep you immersed in the game world for that split second, for that time. And then you kind of leave the venue, you're on your way back to wherever, and then it just, as soon as you get back and put your trophy down, it comes. It's almost like you allow it to just sink in. And it's all mental for me. It's never been hands or like physical. It's all been mental. Like, I'm just tired. I just need a sleep. Sometimes I'll sleep for 2 days straight. And then I'm right as rain again. I can do it all again straight after. So,
yeah, I also think if you have professional equipment and the experience of how you need to play, RSI or tendonitis and stuff, if you do everything right, they shouldn't really come into play at all. I think like our generation, we grew up with the PC and we got we got the lifelong experience sometimes. In my case, I've been playing since I was 4, and it just becomes natural. Like, if something hurts or something, take a break. And if you feel like your eyes are, watery or painful, take a break. And then you come back. And I've never had anything seriously, apart from perhaps a lack of suntan or something.
The only thing about it is that I have, when we have these prolonged periods of exercise with the team in front of the computer, I really have to eat like I would if I was actually working out physically, because I get so drained. It takes so much concentration, so I get hungry, so I need food breaks. And because there's always a myth about the gamer who sits inside in a dark room, doesn't eat for 12 hours, then comes out, eats 2 pizzas, and then goes back. It doesn't work like that for me. To be able to perform, I have to have meals in between, otherwise I have no concentration, and I wouldn't say black out, but I just sort of fade out.
I actually don't realize sometimes when I'm playing how hungry I am until the phone rings or I take a break for some reason. Then I'm like, oh my god, you know. So there are times of just playing, you know, to a point. But then there are other occasions where, for example, a good friend of mine who's a professional player, he won't actually eat before a tournament because, I don't know, the digestive system takes a big toll on the body, but he just, for some reason, he doesn't like eating before big tournaments, and he always performs really well, whereas I'm the complete opposite. I cannot perform on an empty stomach. I need to have some food in me, even if it's 5 pizzas, from anything from a bowl of cereal or a chocolate bar to like 10 pizzas. I need something going on. And so that just goes to show a big difference in, you know, player performance levels. But ultimately it's about knowing yourself. It's about knowing, like, if it hurts, take a rest, for example.
So maybe you can share with us perhaps a moment where you've done that brilliant tactic in the game, and whilst some of us talk about being inside the game and perhaps some teams are a little bit more boisterous than others, what's happening that we don't see when you deliver that tactic or you deliver that kill? How does it feel when you've just done everything right, and especially as a team when you've done everything right, or that your technology is just working perfectly and you're feeling on? Can you just tell us a bit how that feels?
There was a time early on in 2002, 2003 where Counter-Strike competitions were really, I don't know, civil, I guess. Kind of like Warcraft, where you just play your game and then you're done, you just say thanks for the match and stuff like that. But at one point it just turned ugly. Mm-hmm. So I think what happened was that players realized that if you're sitting across from the other team or your opponent and you're playing these high-level matches in Counter-Strike, you can really help put the other team down by screaming and overly celebrating a well-played round or a well-executed strategy. And you see that in other sports and other esports as well. It's people trash talk each other, and that really exploded during that time. And today people are really overly celebrating, but that's also part of the game. It's part of a tactic to bring the other team down and pump yourself up as well, to be able to perform better. And that's what we usually try and do if we win an important round. Say a big round comes down to a 1v1 situation. Obviously the player that lost is going to feel distraught. He's going to have a slump in his concentration. Maybe for the next round that will affect the outcome of the match. So it's really important for Counter-Strike players to celebrate like that. At least most teams play like that these days now as well. There are some people who like to be there and sit quietly, but not a lot. Counter-Strike competitions gets loud because of that.
If I can ask you something, Jonas, I was wondering, what do you think, how would a team do? Like, let's say 5 guys, all dressed in suits, they come down, they sit there, they play their game, and they, no matter what happens, no matter how bad they lose or how hard you scream in their face, they say, thank you very much for the game, it was an honor. How would they do? Do you think they would be at a disadvantage?
Well, again, it comes down to how the individual or the individuals perceive themselves and what their strengths are. I know for a fact that the best team in the world, Fnatic, they have a thing where they tell each other to just sit there, play your game, and do what you can. So, but obviously they cheer and yell as well, but not as much as some of the other teams who will. I mean, there's levels. So some teams, they cheer for each frag or by each round won, even if they're at a 10-round deficit. And that really won't help you. It will just drain your energy. But if you, but most teams, they really cheer to. It's like scoring a goal in football. You don't turn around, you walk to the midfield, and you say, thank you, that was an honor to score that goal. You have to let the energy out.
I think in the fighting game world, when we talk about cheering and sort of like camaraderie and kind of support for each other. I really felt the worlds collided when the UK players, or European players, started going over to the US to play in these big tournaments.
Yeah.
Because the US players, they don't care what you think. They're going to tell you how they feel about that round that they won, or that tactic that was played well, and they're going to let you, and it's going to be in your face, you know. And we had to embrace that, because this is their style. You know, we're on their turf. We got to blend in, you know. And in some cases, it was almost like you realize that you're not supporting each other enough to a degree. You know, you're on each other's side. You know your friends are there, but they're not really like getting in the match with you, and that definitely makes a difference. You know, if you've got people behind you supporting you, obviously it's not team based, but they are your team because you travel together, you're all a group of friends, you know, you're close, and you practice together and stuff like that, and everyone understands and appreciates what's happening on the game and what the game means, how high level it is, etc. So it's just as much a part of a team as probably Counter-Strike or you know, Warcraft or anything like that. So I do definitely think that when the US players were, you know, screaming maybe what was initially just friendly banter, it definitely empowered them. I felt that they were, you know, sort of a lot stronger from, you know, the way they were supporting each other. And to answer the question about, you know, that moment of unleashing that technique, well, in my case, a lot of the time it would be something that I made up, and so it would be really rewarding, like a personal reward of my creativity being put to use. And it's always a nice feeling, it's a nice buzz when you win a match or a round, especially if it's in a really important situation against someone who is very well known, for example. And there's definitely an adrenaline rush, but in the fighting game world, I think a lot of the players keep it to themselves. They're very good at not sort of letting that smile go. They're very good at holding it in. And then we went to America.
Yeah,
and they're complete opposite. They let you know.
It was one of the most interesting things about the whole experience with the Championship Gaming Series in the US, because we had a fighting game player on our team, and the way they set it up for TV was that they had their microphones, and the microphones were open at all times. So it was really up to the discretion of the producers to decide what sound bites came out. And some of the fighting game players, they were like talking all the time. They were like playing and talking. They weren't really saying anything. It just seemed like they were talking for the sake of talking.
Well, there's always something to say.
But it was really fun at times to hear the comments of players winning or losing, and it really added to the experience of watching the games as a sport, I thought. And these days, if I watch a Counter-Strike tournament or some kind of electronic sports tournament, it's important to me to be able to see the player, because not only is it interesting to see the level of skill displayed on screen in game, but I think it's also really interesting to see the level of passion that these players, these competitors, bring to the table at these tournaments, and it's really about making the game interesting, and you have to have the human side as well. We can't all have the pixels in game and all of that stuff.
Well, on the topic of cheering, I believe that cheering too loudly may have two different detrimental effects as a Warcraft 3 player. I think the first one that seems most clear to me is sometimes when you beat your arch nemesis, or a very difficult player, or something, you did something which you're very proud of, somewhere in the middle of the tournament, if you cheer very loudly, or you're very happy, it can be inward, it can be outwards, it could be a sign that you are so happy with the point to where you got that you stop trying to get even further. Like it's a little bit about ambition. And I don't really understand why there is a difference in perception of this when I compare Counter-Strike to Warcraft 3. Probably in Counter-Strike you cheer because you need the momentum, you need to hear that your teammates are there for you and so on. But in Warcraft 3 it's different. I think, like, let's say if you win the semis and you're just so happy that you made it to the semis, and you're like, oh, I already made it to the finals, it's already a lot more than I expected, then usually, you know, your tournament life ends there. You're so happy with second place already that that's probably what you'll get.
But Sorry to interrupt you, but isn't that also sort of like a cultural thing for Warcraft? Because I've always perceived Warcraft players in competition to be much more polite than a lot of the other players involved in esports, because I mean, it seems at least a lot more polite when the cameras are on. I don't know if you guys trash talk each other online and stuff like that. You probably do, but when the tournament is on, you seem more polite, while Counter-Strike players and fighting game players, they will cheer each other.
It could be that a large part of the RTS market has shifted to Asia, and in Asia you don't speak your emotions, everything that you're thinking, you don't say everything. In fact, you say nearly nothing what you're thinking. Yeah, and you really have to fit in. I really have to fit in with the Asian environment too, because back in the days when I used to be a trash talker too. I mean, if you can say something which will make your opponent uncomfortable or angry, and if that's going to throw him off his game, then I had no compunction about using that. But that just kind of changed gradually, because I think if I keep doing that now, I'll lose all my friends and practice partners. Yeah, so I think the Asian influence with keeping a straight face, being modest, and not showing emotions has really had an effect on the Warcraft 3 culture.
Thanks. 1,000 more questions here, but I think to be fair that we'll kick it back out to the audience. So is there any questions out there? Oh, sorry.
I'll run the wireless
Oh,
mic
wait,
to
Rose.
people.
We have a microphone?
Yeah. And if you could sort of say your name and before you talk.
Hi, my name is Boris. I'm from Latvia, Letland, but I'm representing a Russian website, bookgame.ru. And I have a question regarding this cheering stuff. Maybe you have heard, most probably, about a Korean player, Firebet Hero, who is a StarCraft pro player, and he's dancing and cheering and humiliating his opponents.
And himself.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask what's your attitude, who knows about it, about all this stuff he's doing on the scene. Thank you.
Well, it just seems so un-Korean in some way. And I must say, I really don't know what kind of effect it has on his opponents, but I could well imagine, and that's one point I forgot to say just now, the second detrimental effect. When you're making fun of your opponent, humiliating them in any way, like doing a silly dance and nearly breaking his ankle, he did once, I think, you really make your opponent want to beat you.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's exactly the desired effect. If you feel like it's going to have an effect on him to increase the temperature, increase the pressure, and somehow let him make mistakes. But sometimes when you create a group of people who really want to beat you, just by you being arrogant, aloof, or humiliating them, it's just going to come back at you in the next tournament, because you're going to be their #1 target.
I've had limited experience with dancing, but my personal view of the whole cheering thing is that I personally didn't do it or want my team to do it if it wasn't important, because it has to sort of underlie that this is important, we achieved something, whether it was just a key round or a key frag. You don't cheer just to cheer because it sort of blows you out, it blows your energy out as well, and you look really dumb if you cheer your heart out and then you still lose the game. So I think the important thing is to worry about cheering when you have something to cheer for. Counter-Strike players, they don't usually do the dance thing or anything like that, but some players like to stand up and do stuff like that. Myself, I threw my shirt to the crowd in China once. They seem to appreciate that, even though I'm sure it was, it's come back to haunt me ever since. I'm sure I made a fool out of myself, but it's the beauty of sports as well. You have to have individuals, they have to react to what happens, and it just adds to the excitement of watching games live for fans and organizers.
So this question is the same question for all of you, but it'll be answered in a different way from Manuel, and then Ryan and Jonas, I'll tell you the part of it I want you to answer. So Manuel, the question is, you're talking about these tiers. You go from local, bedroom to local to regional to national and so on and so forth. And in Warcraft and RTS games, Korea has this special sort of place as being the ultimate level. And I believe you played in Korea and you had that whole experience of going there and doing that. So for you, the question is, what was that like? Can you talk about that whole experience of going to Korea and being there, being a foreigner, playing there I think you were there for a while, and what that was like? And then for Ryan and Jonas, I'm just curious, in your genres, is there a similar sort of pinnacle that represented, I've really gotten to the top, some experience that was sort of a rite of passage to get to that level in your genres?
Well, yeah, I think especially in the early days of Warcraft 3, the top tier was Korea. It was the place to go when you wanted to get your ass kicked. We went there for about 3 months, my team and me. I arranged for our team to be able to play in some Korean leagues, 2 different leagues, the NBC League and the OnGameNet League. And to put it in the simplest and most concise way possible, you just see your win rate dwindle from 85% to 50%. And if you're at 50%, you're really good. And I think my own win rate in the leagues was just under 50%, and I was quite satisfied with that.
Yes, in fighting games there is that pinnacle, that paragon that you try to work towards, and for each fighting game it's different, but it always ends at Southeast Asia. And for most fighting games it's Japan. There are exceptions. I think for the Tekken series it's definitely Korea. They've always been at the top level, just always managing to overpower Japan in major tournament finals. And I think when you go to Asia for a tournament, I think it's the most, especially for a top player from Europe, it's the biggest reality check you can have. And basically what happened, like for example, my first visit to Japan was in '98. It was for a Namco Square game called Guys, one-on-one top-down fighting game. And I was going there for the World Championship finals, and I'd never been to Japan or seen any footage, because back then we didn't have YouTube and all these, networking things that we have now. So for me, I thought, yeah, I'm going to go there and show them all. They're not going to see it coming, blah, blah, blah. You do all the talk, and then you go there and it's a very humbling experience, But on top of them humbling you on the game, they're very nice, which is like, I'm not used to this. Good guys are meant to be loud, and they're meant to show off when they win. These guys are too nice. I can't even be happy when I win against these guys, And yeah, there is that pinnacle. And basically, when you go to perform in Japan, you really learn a lot. You learn, hey, I'm actually quite good at this, or oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was, And when you come back to Europe, it's strange, because now you're like this, like you're already like the best when you left, and now it's too much better because you've been playing with all these amazing experts, and you go back to your own world, and it's almost like it's not enough anymore, and so you keep going backwards and forwards, and after a while, you get to a stage where you can compete on a pretty much national level in Japan or in Korea. But they do, because of their devotion and dedication, they always remain on the top level, no matter what fighting game comes out. And it's always been like that, and probably might always be like that.
Well, my biggest goal in Counter-Strike early on was we didn't have a Korea, like a country that you go to where everybody's that much better. But back in the day, it was a Cyberathlete professional league based in Dallas. And that's really when you knew you'd made it. When you got to go there on sponsorship dollars, and you got to go there and compete against the best players and the best teams in the world, you really knew that you were a top-class player yourself. So that was really the tournament really that we all worked so hard to get into. And over the years that has changed, obviously. There's been new tournaments coming and going, and these days I think for most Counter-Strike players the biggest events of the year are the World Cyber Games, because it has an Olympic profile. It's sort of different in that way. It's not the same competitive atmosphere that you'd get in other tournaments, but it's a different animal altogether. And the most competitive tournament is without a doubt the ESL Masters series today. And it's interesting to see how that's changed from the United States and back to Europe. And I always also wanted to, when I was playing, I also wanted to go to Korea, not because of the competition there, but it was also interesting for us as Counter-Strike players to go there and see how Warcraft 3 players and StarCraft players are praised as celebrities. And it was also the first country in the world to have esports televised. So there was like these several different layers that you wanted to achieve, but ultimately the Cyberathlete professionally was the place to go at first, and now that's changed back to Europe.
If I can elaborate on one more point of cultural differences. After coming back from Korea, where I practiced for 3 months, I felt like I improved a lot. And it's a very funny feeling when you come back to your own country and you feel like you're the king. Now all these puny Europeans without all the knowledge that I have gathered. I mean, undoubtedly the level in Korea was higher, but it's not just higher, it's also like a kind of a parallel shift. There are cultural differences. In Korea they really hone their skills and do perfections and just try to really increase the effectiveness of the execution. And in Europe, sometimes simply because they don't give a damn, sometimes because they feel like adaptability is more important. There is more variety of plays, so you get back there and you feel like you're executing everything so well. You've got this one perfect weapon. You could compare it to like a tennis player who has this this incredibly strong serve, and his opponent, like an amateur, just can't hold it. Every time you shoot, he can't hold it. But so I bring those weapons, if you will, back to Europe, and you lose to these lame things, like little surprises or things which you don't do them because they don't work.
Yeah.
And they do. They catch you off guard, and you learn to respect not just the top tier, but also every little idea from all the different countries: Russia, Latvia, Eastern Europe, Sweden. Almost every country has their own significant different play style, and I think that's the really interesting things about going to another country and playing against the people there.
The most refreshing thing for me as a Counter-Strike player to get out of Europe early on, and I had a team in Brazil also that I played for. Even though we went to the CPL in America, which was the pinnacle of competition, you really didn't have fans there. I mean, there were some spectators, but you didn't have fans. So going to South America or going to China was completely different experience, because you had a line of people waiting for you once you finished practicing or once you finished your match, and you had to sign your autograph. And that was a really weird experience. Even though you'd been a top player in Europe for years, you never experienced that. So the cultural differences from Asia going back to Europe and America are significant for gamers.
And also when you go there and you see that there are that many amazing players, a lot better than you would have ever imagined, being so polite, it changes your personality almost when you come back. You're like, well, these guys are so humble, but they're so amazing. Maybe we should turn it down a notch. You know, what are we shouting about? We're nothing compared to these guys. And these guys, and for them, they're just like, it's normal for them. You know, you go there and a level you've never imagined is their standard level. You know, they practice so hard to perfect every single technique. They never make a mistake in a certain situation. Their execution is flawless, and you can certainly see their devotion. But then, because when you play for a few months with these guys, they go back to your own town, like you were saying. Like, you're so used to the way they play that you've almost forgotten that there are things that can catch you out. And then it's not that you're not as good as those other people, but there are things that you just kind of forgotten, because that's not what's done. No one uses that because that's rubbish. But you know, there's always room for more, and that's what makes games fun, I guess.
Hi, my name is Sergey. I come from Barcelona. I have a couple of questions. The second one is a very short one. So, and the first one is kind of related to the previous. On the role of global competitions, there was a time, not that far away in fact, where it seemed they were going on global domination. I'm talking about the likes of CPL, CGS, ESWC, World Cyber Games. This model has been put into question because of the financial crisis, as their business model relies too heavily on a handful of very big global sponsors and a very hardcore international and hence small international audience. The fact is that due to technical problems, which coming from Spain, this is a huge issue in Spain, and because of different attitudes and cultures regarding gaming, it's difficult to popularize gaming when the reference is these big global competitions, because the games they play there, it would be very difficult to make them popular in Spain. So can you envision as players another model, possibly a more local or national one, like it's happened in Korea or up to a point in the United States with Major League Gaming? Do you think that's possible or even desirable? And the second question is, if you could choose, would you rather have a cheering audience like in football, you know, very supportive and screaming, or a tennis one?
Definitely a football one. That was an easy question.
I think there's a difference between, you know, harmful banter and just good sportsmanship, and I think that's good sportsmanship. Football style would work if you can have those two together.
I'm not sure if I can comment on the first question because it's a very complicated question, and I don't know the climate in Spain, like the gaming climate. But as for the second question, a cheering one. A cheering audience gives you energy.
It was really, I agree with Grubby, it's really hard to answer your first question. But we've seen over the years that there are several things that work and don't work. And what Counter-Strike 1.6 has shown us above all else is a very tight-knit community of people that enjoy that game. They don't really enjoy, you can't translate the crowd from 1.6 to Source, you can't translate the crowd from 1.6 to Call of Duty. So that's why those competitions have survived, and because of the global nature of the competitions early on, I'm a firm believer that we have this worldwide community now because of the global aspect of the first competitions, because it's interesting to people in Brazil, because Brazilians, or the Brazilian community, could see MIBR go from Brazil to ESWC or to CPL, and that helped create interest around the world. In a sense, it's sort of the way that football works as well. You have to have your national teams or your best teams go to somewhere else to compete against others, and that attracts interest and makes it a global sport. But like you say, there are also individual differences between the countries. Like for instance in Korea, where you have StarCraft leagues and stuff like that, and several places in Norway as well. You have leagues in games that people like us don't really care about. There's a lot of people playing those games, like the MLG as well with their American tournaments. So I don't think there's a correct answer to your question. I only think that the answer is, that's the way it works right now, is that people that see a certain amount of players or a certain amount of people following a certain game, they realize that they can capitalize on it, build a tournament, build a community, and I'm all for that, even though I would want like a huge organization that could organize these tournaments and sort of confound them more and have a more global community for everything. But I realize that that's maybe a little bit too ambitious right now.
Right, we should probably go to break, but maybe can you do it really quick? Super quick answer, perhaps.
Okay, so this is for Jonas. You were talking about these raw talents that had very short careers, and you had to, put them in the place so they could, not burn out. Would you describe yourself as trying to cultivate this culture of trying to prevent young talents from burning out? And how would you three kind of promote this culture? Because as you described in football, football has been there for a long time. You have these experienced people trying to guide young talents to, not burning out. How would you guys try and promote this fairly new digital culture so you could prevent young people from burning out? I mean, how would you promote that?
Well, the way I did it, I can only answer for myself in that sense that by engaging in each young player or in some young players, trying to sort of show them the ropes, because there's a sense that they feel that everything is too easy once they attain a certain level, they feel that everything is easy and they'll be the next big thing, like I said earlier on. By trying to show them the ropes and explain and share some of the experiences I've made over the years, that's sort of how I hope to instilling them the values you need to keep playing at a high level, because your life, I mean my life, over the last 10 years has gained immensely from being able to play at a certain level in this world, or just the amount of positive experiences I've made because of esports. I want also other people to have that. So that's sort of my motivation for trying to help instill that in some young players. But a lot of them need, at least for Counter-Strike, because of the aggressive nature of Counter-Strike, or impolite nature of Counter-Strike, whatever you want to call it, you need to be strict with young players, otherwise they won't learn. They won't learn how stuff works in our world. Obviously my hope is that they can take those experiences to guide them or help them, and to tell other players as well, so we can share the collective experiences we've made. And yeah, it works most like that, or IRC to IRC.
Yeah, well, in the fighting game world, it's usually their initial attraction that brings them to the fighting game that they want to play. And there is, whatever game they go towards, there'll already be a set hierarchy of players. There'll be these guys who are around their level, maybe their friends down the road, people that they know at local events. Then there'll be more known players higher up the list. And no matter how good they are or how good they get in a short space of time, they'll always get more and more hungry with each win, and eventually they'll become frustrated with the fact that they always get stopped by this so-and-so famous player at the end. They always lose in the quarterfinals, and somehow just being a quarterfinalist isn't enough anymore, and then that's when they start seeking out sort of bigger and better resources, and that's where the top players get a chance for input. And with forums and IRC and all kinds of mediums, we have a way to communicate with them. Something bigger than that, like a foundation or a school that they come to learn, I don't know how practical or how realistic something like that is. I know for some players they'll be like, oh yeah, school, that would be great, go and learn off this guy, and that would be cool. But I'm not sure if it's interesting, it's definitely an interesting concept, but I'm not sure how forthcoming it would be within the next couple of years or something. But I would definitely say that it's their own initial hunger that brings them to the table of, I want more, and that's where we then have a chance to communicate with them, get them to where they need to be, which is usually by communicating things that they're missing in their own individual game. It's not normally just a base thing, it's normally something that they have wrong with what they're doing that we can see because of our experience or know-how that they don't have. Once that's communicated, they then have a chance to take it up a level, and then hopefully it's nice to get them to a point where they can understand by themselves what they're doing, so that we don't always have to keep nurturing them forever. And it's getting them to that point. That's why we're here, I guess.
I hope I didn't misunderstand your question. If so, just make like a big X with your arms. You asked something about on the topic of burnout. I'm not sure, but I think if you're always doing what you enjoy doing, the chance of a burnout is much lower. And I've had a lot of players come to me and say, look, how do you keep your motivation up, man? Surely you have motivation problems sometime, or you're not enjoying yourself anymore. The answer is no, I haven't. You have to try and keep it fun for yourself. So don't try to force something which is not coming too naturally. Don't know if this goes for everyone, but that's how it works for me. Like, let's say if you need to desperately improve your micromanagement, like you need to be much more precise with all the little movement, and you're trying to force it too much, and it's not fun anymore, then it won't be very effective anymore either. Just try to diversify your playing. Still try to be busy with the game, but do it in a way that you enjoy yourself. Go play a free-for-all game which can last 3 hours, where everyone is backstabbing each other and lying, like, you must attack him now, his army is out. It's a game of backstabbing. You're training different skills and you're keeping it fun. So that kind of refreshment is very important, and I think that's one of the ways in which I've managed to never really lose the enjoyment of the game. And I think by doing that, you kind of avoid a burnout.
So it's also important to instill in young players how important individual goals are for your career to avoid burnout. Because I was really lucky in that regard. Because I didn't have my goal when I started trying to become a professional player wasn't to be a world champion. My goal was to become a professional level, to be good enough to be a professional level. And once I got there, I figured out, hey, this is fun. I want to do something more. And I had another goal that I set. And when I attained that goal, I set a new goal and stuff like that. So if you initially say you're going to be a world champion, it's nice and it's admirable, but all of us sitting here knows how extremely hard and how few make it. So for a lot of young players, if they say they want to be a world champion, then they break through, become a professional player, then at the next tournament they have a huge disappointment, because disappointments will happen.
And they will hurt at that level of experience, minimal experience.
And that might be enough to quit or to take a break over the summer, to just go out and chase girls and drink alcohol, you know, and that might be enough to derail a fantastic talent from achieving what he or she could achieve.
I'm sorry to stop us here. We'd love to keep going on, but a big thanks to Manuel, Ryan, and Jonas for being here and sharing it. And please feel free to take the discussions out into the atrium or keep them for later if the later out there.
About a 10-minute break. We'll kind of try to make it time a little bit. 10-minute break, and then we'll come back to the next one.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It was so interesting. And it's so